What's up guys, it's BreakShift, coming at you with a quick video on instability modifiers. If you're looking for suggested setups, check the description. I'm going to be posting codes for setups going from 5 all the way up to 50 that you can just copy and paste into the game. The rest of this video is just going to be a brief overview of the different categories of modifiers, why I suggest taking them in the order I do, and which ones you should avoid. Assuming that your goal is going to be to climb up to high instability, so somewhere from 30 to 50, then I suggest you start with modifiers that influence your HP. So stuff like lingering injuries, stuff like collapsing hallways, frail constitution, all of these guys. These are good to start with because ideally you should be perfecting most of your fights, if not all of them. Vault is a game where you have a lot of control over things like, you can keep cards in your hand from turn to turn, you can bank energy turn over turn. If you're smart, you can set things up in such a way that you'll often take no damage on lower difficulties. And it's important to develop these kind of play habits if you want to be able to hack it in high instability. So you might as well get those started right away, pile on all of those. Stuff like One for All even counts as well in this category. And as long as you're perfecting fights, these modifiers are free. It's as if they don't do anything at all. The one exception to that is Festering Scars. On my I-50 setup, just play with one stack of Festering Scars. And I would suggest that you probably do the same, because even though, like I said, you should be trying to perfect all your fights, you do need to have some margin for error. Sooner or later, you're gonna gamble on something that's like an 80% chance, and you just don't draw the one card you needed, and you take a hit or something, right? It happens. So Festering Scars at 75% heal at the end of a floor is a really excellent safety net. Gives you a little bit of leeway. Make sure that you don't have to go out of your way or get lucky to get healing if something does go wrong. And it's still worth 2 points just to have that one stack, so the missing 25% heal is really not that bad in the grand scheme of things. Once you've gone through all of the health modifiers, next I suggest you start working on economic modifiers, so stuff like tight pockets, stuff like imperfect works, reducing your essence gain, or your ability to spend that essence. This is not as bad as you might think, because essence, in most runs, essence is really only going to be used for a couple things that really matter. Like, if you go to a card shop, maybe buying a rare there or something matters, and maybe you want to buy a relic at the Lost and Found, right? Like, generally there's not a ton of use for essence outside of that, and you just dump the rest of it into the Well of Stars just to get something out of it. You're not going to feel too bad about the increased essence costs. You do need to be a little bit worried about stuff that modifies your souls. So, for example, the Damned. I don't actually recommend taking the Damned at all, because this will reduce your soul gain pretty significantly. Souls are very important. I always say the most important node of 90% of runs is the Floor 2 Soul Collector. And when it's not the Floor 2 Soul Collector, it's often because you just went to the Queen instead to spend your souls there. Souls are a big deal. The Damned, it's just too much of a decrease in souls. I would say avoid that, but you can afford to take something like Take It or Leave It, for example. You shouldn't be declining elite artifacts, but when it comes to like the cursed item, being able to just skip it and get 3 free souls is pretty nice, but that only happens every so often in a run, and when that does happen, when you do run into a cursed item, oftentimes you'll just want to take it or drain it instead. So something like Take It or Leave It, not that bad. Once you've gone through some of the economic modifiers, next I would recommend taking stuff like Eroding Sanity and Adaptation. These are things that are actually going to affect the middle of your fight a little bit. So, Eroding Sanity, it adds a little bit of damage. It's not that much, but it is something. This will actually make it more difficult to just clear fights, period, unlike all the other stuff we've talked about so far. Adaptation, a more severe one, mostly just for losing out turns of vulnerable. But You can handle these by playing quickly, playing aggressively, trying to kill around turn 4 most of the time. That's usually what you should aim for, is killing around turn 4, and you'll notice that most of these effects don't kick in, even at maximum levels, until turn 4. Right? Eroding Sanity kicks in 1 turn before that, but it's only a single point of damage, so really not that bad. If you're playing aggressively, which again is something you want to be doing, this is going to help you build those kind of habits, trying to play for quick kills, then you'll find that they're not actually all that bad. And at this point, you've already surpassed 30, if you're following my guide. Things are going to start to get tougher after this. You're going to need to take modifiers that hurt you quite a bit more. And the next thing that you're going to look at is modifiers that remove some of your early resources. So we're talking about stuff like Uninspired, turning your starting uncommon into a common, stuff like Knew I Forgot Something, eventually even Lost in Time, to miss out on the Matron of Memories event. And these all hurt you quite a bit. It definitely is a significant difference playing without these versus with them, but you've got slim pickings at this point. You've got to take some tough ones if you want to make it all the way up to 50. The last thing I recommend touching to get all the way to 50 is a single stack of Praetorian Guard. You know, Guardian fights are pretty tough, so not taking an extra one is usually really nice. But you gotta do something to get up to 50. I don't ever recommend taking the second stack of Praetorian, because that means you can't skip any of the Vault Guardians. And that's a problem, because there's almost always at least one Guardian that your deck is probably weak to, right? Whether it's the Spiders because you're too slow, or maybe it's the Death Knight because you're too reliant on playing block cards. Every deck has a weakness, and among all of the Vault Guardians, there's a chance you get countered. You don't know ahead of time what kind of deck you're going to build, so even when you see the Guardians at the start of the game, you won't know if you should be particularly worried about one of them or not. Just the Spiders alone, right? The fact that you could be forced to fight Spiders on every single run where they spawn, I think should be enough to discourage this, even though it is worth a lot of instability. The other ones that I haven't mentioned at all are ones I just would generally avoid taking at all. Original Sin, I used to use this a lot, but these days I find it's better just to skip out on it and lose some of the resources at the start of the game instead. This hurts you the most during the early game, of course, before you get to cleanse them, but it does so in a lot of really bad ways, right? It lowers your draw consistency, which means you're going to take more damage. It makes you vulnerable, of course, when you draw the Void, so that further amplifies the damage you're taking. And worst of all, perhaps, it heavily restricts your pathing. You absolutely have to hit a shrine as soon as you possibly can. So that might make you miss out on key cards, might reduce your ability to acquire relics, and it also introduces a lot of variance to your runs, because whether or not you get an early shrine while you have starting Voids in the deck is a huge deal, right? Sometimes the shrine can literally be like the 4th node you go to, and then it's really no big deal at all, but most of the time that's not going to happen, and then it's a huge deal. I personally like to play for consistency a lot. If you're someone who doesn't mind just high rolling, and even if you're someone who wants to reset your runs if you don't get a favorable start, then Original Sin might be a little better for you. But if you are going to play valuing consistency, definitely avoid it. For the same kind of reason, Fog of War, this is a really bad one to take if you want to be consistent. Even just a single stack cuts off a lot of your vision of the map compared to having no stacks, and that's going to really reduce your ability to plan ahead. You won't know what cards you're getting, you won't know where your key nodes are. You're not going to be able to make long-term plans in the way that you would like to. So I would say don't ever take any stacks of Fog of War if you can help it. If you are going for Fog of War, it is something you can just kind of go all in on. You know, you can get 12 instability points out of this thing if you max it out and just make a generally zigzaggy path. So it's an option, but not one I would recommend. Ambush, I don't think I probably need to spend too much time explaining why I wouldn't recommend taking Ambush. This is just a crazy modifier. It's worth 18 points for a reason. It's such a huge increase in difficulty. It dramatically changes the way you have to play. It pretty much requires that you put a green stone in a block card. And, you know, especially if you're playing with NiwxSomething, not starting with that random stone, it could be a long time before you get a green stone. Who knows? It puts you on the back foot right away. It doesn't give you a turn to set up buffs. It's just really bad, right? It's worth a lot, but it's too difficult for you to be able to consistently handle, I would say. It's kind of fun as like a little challenge run to do an ambush build here or there, but in general, don't bother with it. Void Blessed is another one I like to avoid. Obviously, this only affects regular mob rooms, so not the most important fights in the game, right? It doesn't bother with elites, it doesn't do anything about bosses, Vault Guardians, none of that. But what it does do is increase the number of turns it'll take you to kill some of those regular fights. And even though in general those are not the fights you're concerned about, there's often at least one particular fight that is worrying. So, for example, Enlightened often has a hard time dealing with the firebugs. Or if you're playing Corruption Daughter and you run into an early Greenhouse of Corruption with the mushrooms and the carnivorous plant guy, it's really, really bad if they have extra health, right? Just taking one more turn to kill them could mean that you're taking a pretty huge amount of damage, and you really don't want to be dealing with that. You want to be cruising through the regular mob fights as much as you can so that you can save up your health and potions and stuff to use on those fights that matter. Making the regular mob fights significantly more difficult does matter a lot in that regard, so I would say no Void Blessed. I already explained why I would say no more Festering Scars than one stack, as well as the Last Praetorian. Lastly, there's a few that are kind of character-specific. Like, for example, Coming in Hot. This one's not bad at all on Corruption Daughter. And for some of the super aggressive starts you can have, too, so maybe like a Lightning Tempest, or, excuse me, a Thunder Tempest, where you have Smite. It might not be that bad because you can just kill really quickly with the aggressive ones, or with Corruption Daughter you're purging down a ton of cards at the start of each fight anyway for the most part, and so you'll be dropping off all that burning. But it's quite a bit of damage, and it does change the way you play. It's sort of like a reverse eroding sanity, but you start out with, like, 6 burning, right? That's a pretty significant amount, and it's guaranteed to affect you. Eroding sanity might not even do anything if you kill fast enough, right? So if you are playing in a way where you find yourself, just purging a ton at the start, if you're playing passively, maybe you can go ahead and do Coming in Hot. I certainly wouldn't recommend it in general across all characters. It's pretty tough, but you could use it here or there. In a somewhat similar vein, we have What Comes Around. Shuffling Banes into your deck when you reshuffle. This does nothing the first cycle through of your deck, so if you're killing people before you ever cycle your deck with one of those super aggressive builds, maybe this doesn't bother you. If you're playing a very cycle-heavy class like Daughter or Hidden, then you can probably discard the Banes, and then it's not much of a concern. But other times, like on Enlightened, this is devastating because if you draw a Bane, suddenly you can't go Zen, your whole turn is ruined. Super variable between characters. You could probably get away with one stack as like a general use thing, but for 1 point, I think I would rather have any of the other guys that are worth 1 point. Collapsing, Take It, Imperfect, all of those are probably better than 1 point of What Comes Around. So it just doesn't ever really have a chance to be of use. But you could just play with 1 point of this and it wouldn't bother you. Anything more than that, I would probably not recommend unless it was specifically for Hidden or Daughter. And that should be every modifier that we've talked about here. Oh, Blind Spot. I didn't mention Blind Spot. Blind Spot is something that you'll incorporate as you climb up to 50 following my guide. It does kind of stink to not get the pre-fight information. There's a handful of situations where you would really want to be able to brew up a potion or side in one specific card if you're knowing that you're going into like a single target hallway fight versus a multi-target hallway fight. That can make a big difference. But you probably are going to be building decks that are set up for success across multiple fights and don't need too much altering between them. So the more you play with Blind Spot and the more you build around it, the more you'll start to realize it's not as bad as you'd expect. It also really helps that a lot of times you can predict, like, with elites, for example, you know that they're generally going to be single target fights. With the bosses, right, you generally know if they have minions, they're going to be about this much health, how you can play around that. It's not as bad as it sounds. And that actually is the last one, so anyway, again, check the description if you guys want to see sample setups, if you want to copy them to use for your own runs. I've got everything from 5 through 50, and if you like the video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more content, and I'll be seeing you guys soon. Peace.